Box Mania, how to make a tuck box. So, we're going to make a tuck box. I'm going to show you how to make a tuck box. Like this one. Just a tuck box. Nothing fancy, boring. There's plenty of ways to fancy them up. You can do it. I'm just going to show you how to make a basic tuck box. And I'm going to make a tuck box for these cards, which are from Zaya. I'm going to make a Zaya box, just starting, so I thought I'd make some tuck boxes first to help me work out how to get everything in the box. So, this basic tuck box, I make them out of just old rubbish. This is an old muesli box. If I need a bigger tuck box, I might make them out of a pizza box, an old frozen pizza box. It's quite thin. Or any kind of box or any kind of card that's got some thickness, but it's not too thick. But it's not too thin. You don't want to do it out. You could make them out of paper, but they don't last very long. So a bit of card. This stuff's perfect. Food packaging. So it's all pretty rough. Right, and I'm going to make a box like this. And then I'll photocopy the type of the card and I'll stick it on there so I know these are the cards that will fit in the box. Right, so the first thing we need to do is what size cards, what size box we want to make. So the first thing we do, right, we'd measure the length of the card. It's 8.8. I work in centimetres. 8.8 centimetres, and the width of the card 6.3, 6.4, something like that. And I'd measure the thickness of the deck, the depth of the deck, which is 1.3. Now, if these were sleeved, they would be much bigger, and if I was measuring the depth of the sleeved cards, I would squeeze them to push them down and measure, rather than measure them when they're loose. I'd measure them squashed. So, now, I've made something to maybe try and help you. And I might put a photo of this up on my geek list that I've got on Board Game Geek so you can see it properly. Now, I'll just show you this. Now, this looks incredibly complicated, right? But this is just to show you what we're doing. It's not as complicated as all this, right? What I would do normally is that, just a couple of scribbles. But I'm just showing this is to show you what we do. So what we're going to do, we're going to get a square piece of this muesli box, and we're going to cut out, we're going to mark these black lines on it that are relevant to the sizes of the cards, and then we're going to cut out all these bits shaded red, and then all these lines that are shaded red are where the cuts are. So I'll just put that there because you can always freeze it and look at it if you need to. So we got W is the width of the card, L is the length of the card, and D is the depth of the deck. So on this you can see this here is the depth of the deck, this is the width of the card, depth of the deck, width of the card, depth of the deck, depth of the deck, length of the card, depth and depth. So I'm just putting that there just so you can see it. It's nowhere near, it's not complicated, it's pretty basic. It looks far more complicated than this. So here I've worked out the Zaya cards. They were 8.8 long, the width was 6.2 and the depth was 1.3. Now if we use these three dimensions here for this depth and width and depth and width, the cards wouldn't fit. It would be too tight because you lose a certain bit. So onto these dimensions, I always add a bit. Now, this is just what I've worked out. You could do something different, whatever works for you. But, you know, I want the cards not to be squashed. I don't want to damage the cards when I'm putting them in or taking them out. So I want a bit of play. So I will add to the length 8.8. I will add 0.4 centimeters. So the final dimensions, the final length that I'm using for my measurements is 9.2. That's 8.8 plus 0.4. Same with the width. 6.2 is how wide the card is, but I will add 0.6 centimeters onto it to make it 6.8. That gives us a bit of play. And the same with the depth. If the deck is 1.3, I add 0.3 to the depth. So the depth is 1.6. So these are my final dimensions. So when I come to do this, it's very bit tiring holding this. So here now I've got the depth is 1.6, and then I add to the width, which is 6.8. So 8.4, and then I add another width, which is 1.6. That makes it 10. I mean, add another depth to make it 10. Add another width to make it 6.8, and add a depth to make 18.4. And I do the same up this way. So I've got the depth is 1.6. The length I will add to the 1.6. That's 10.8. So that's 9.2 plus the 1.6. And then I'll add a depth and add a depth. So now, so when I'm doing it, these are the only things that really matter to me. So you can see on my scrap of paper of how I normally do it, I've worked out the length, the width and the depth, and then I just write these down. And I write these down like this because that's what I will use when I'm measuring on my card. Right. Now, I want to point out, because my videos always take ages, as if anyone's watched my videos, they know they're too long, they're boring. But it's going to take me 20 minutes, half an hour to teach you how to make this tuck box. But this tuck box, I'd make that in, I made it just before this. It took me 6 minutes, and that was not rushing. So it takes about 5-6 minutes to make one of these. It doesn't take long. So I'll put this little thing up here so I can get it. So I get my little sheet that I've cut out from my muesli box, and then what I want to do is I want to make sure that this side and this side are square. Now you could use a square. I could use this and just do it, but I'm not going to do that. But you could do. I'm just going to use my grids on here. So I'll line up the edge with the along there. First of all, got to remember this. I want to make sure that this is going to fit. So I don't know if you can see on here. I hope you can see on this. So I've got 18.4 by 14. So I want to make sure this is going to fit on here. And this is 25, so there's plenty of room that way. 19, so plenty of room. I've got plenty of spare space on here. So I'll line this up to align to the lines on the grid, this edge, and I'll get my ruler and I'll line this up to a vertical, well not vertical, to a square, to the thing that's square, and then I'll cut down that. Right, and I know that and that is square. Then let me just make sure, can you see you can just about see this thing here. That's alright, I can point to it. So now on here, I'll get my ruler marked up to the edge. Now, I'm not that fussy with these tuck boxes, making them. I'm not fussy as like I am doing the boxes, which I'm really fussy. I really muck around, but I don't mind if there's a mil or, you know, well, a little bit of difference anyway. I'm not a total fuss pants when it comes to these. So I'm marking these things along here. So this is why I write them out like this, because I've got this butt it up to the edge here, and I'll mark at 1.6, 8.4, 10, 16.8, and 18.4. So I've marked these measurements I've got, just to say, when you're working these out and adding these together, make sure you do it right. This tuck box I made just before making the video. I thought I'll make one because I wanted to see how long it would take me. So I timed it. It took me 6 minutes to make it. And I thought, and then I'll have an example one to show, and I'll have one of my, because I'm going to make for 4 or 5 tuck boxes for all these cards. And I made it, and the cards don't fit because I buggered up my adding. I wrote 9.2 when it should have been 10.2, so it doesn't fit. So make sure it fits. So I've marked here, right, and I'll also mark up near the top of this. Same things. 1.6, 8.4, 10, 16.8, and 18.4. Right. And then at the 18.4 mark, these 2 marks that I've made, I'm just going to join them up with the ruler. I'm going to cut that off. That's 18.4. Now what I do, here I've got a pen and it hasn't got any ink in it. It's run out of ink, very handy. And I use this to score the lines so I can bend the cards into a box shape. If I don't do it, if you don't do it and you bend it, it's rough. I've just ruined this bit of card, but it's rough and it all breaks. You see? Like this, and it's all kind of broken, it's all a bit of a mess. Whereas if you score it, like this, and you put a bend in it, it's much cleaner. So this is just like a ballpoint pen, but the ink's run out. Now, you can find anything to do this, as long as you can score it without cutting it. So that's the thing, I'm not cutting the card, I'm just squashing it. Because if I scored it with a cut, this is taking, if I scored it with a cut, it's okay, you know, and it bends lovely, bends really nice and clean, but I've cut away so much of the material, it starts flaking up, you see. So you don't want to cut it, you just want to squash it. Now you could just use a ballpoint pen with ink in, but that leaves ink lines on it, so find a pen that's run out of ink. Or buy a pen and scribble for ages until it's run out of ink. Very handy tool. But you might find something else that you can use. So, I'm lining up all these lines that I've done. And I'm just scoring all these lines with my pen with no ink. I hope this video is alright. All my other videos were too long and boring. I thought I'd make this one because people might be interested in this, but now I'm kind of rushing it and it just might be a bit crap, and I bet I'll make a mistake because it's midnight and I'm rushing it. So I've scored those 4 lines. Now I'm going to use these measurements, these vertical measurements, which you can't quite see on the camera, and I'm going to measure up here with these. So 1.6, that's the depth. 10.8, so that's the length of the cards. 12.4 and 14. Now I'll do that again down here. I mean, you could use squares and stuff to save the second measurement, but it really doesn't take a minute. 1.6, 10.8, 12.4, 14. And then at that 14, because that's the top one, I'm going to cut it off straight away. And I'm going to score all these other lines. Now, I like tuck boxes. I always like to keep the cards in my games in boxes I make, or even if I don't make a box and they're in the original boxes, I like to make a tuck box rather than keep them in a baggie. I just like it. So I made this, scored up, and it looks like this. So now I'm just going to talk about this a bit. So now we need to make these cuts. So these big fat red ones down here, I'm going to cut this, and I'm going to cut down there and along here, and then cuts like this here, here and here. Now there's a few other cuts that I've marked on here. One is this. I'll show you this one. You need to cut a little strip off the bottom of these three, because when you fold it up, bits don't get in the way. This is all slightly a kind of a slightly odd cut thing, which I'll explain why. Here you're not cutting up on the lines you've scored, you're cutting slightly inside of them, and that's because this flap needs to go inside. This is the top flap. You can see this is this top flap, and that needs to have room to go in there. And as you can see, these little flaps that hold the cards down, there's just a little bit cut off. Can you see? A little bit cut off to allow that flap to go in. If you cut these on this line, you wouldn't be able to get the flap in, and it starts busting up against cards, and it just gets a bit awkward. So I'm going to cut all those bits now out of my thing, which is all a bit fiddly, but it doesn't take long at all. So cut up there, and a double cut there. I tend to kind of, I try to be vaguely efficient with how I'm doing these, but I never quite get it quite right. So I always end up moving the ruler around a bit more. Now, this is where I want to just cut slightly inside that line, just to make room for my thing. And I've cut a little bit too far in there, mucked it up a little bit as usual. Cut that off. Again, now here I'm cutting slightly away from the line for my little flap. So that's what I do here. I cut one side of the line here and one side of the line here on the outside, and then I'll make this cut here to join them up. I haven't measured how far I cut inside, it's just got to be a little bit. And then I'll cut there. So that bit's out. That corner's out. That corner's out. So that's my basic shape that I've cut out. Cut out the double bit here, the square there, and I've cut this bit out. Now, just my few extra little cuts. I'll just cut the corner off those flaps, because otherwise they tend to get picky. I cut a little V somewhere in the middle of here, like that. That helps me get the cards out. Now, as you can see along the bottom here, I'm going to just cut that off. I'm not going to measure it, it's just a little bit. It's just a little bit, it's not much. What is that, 2-3 mil? You know, you can see here, it's just a little bit. It's not much, just a little bit. It doesn't matter what it is. You obviously don't want to take too much. Now, so that's all that done, and then you can, I've still got one thing to show you. Then you can fold all these, and all these, every joint you do, you now fold. Right, so that's all folded. So you can see how that is just going to make a box now. Now let's just have a little talk about this flap. Now, because that flap is going to go in there. It's going to slip inside. Now, it's hard to get that in there. You can see it's hard to get it in there. So what we need to do, if you can see on this, we need to taper. We need to taper these edges. So when you come to put it in, it fits in. But what we don't want to do is we don't want to taper it all the way down to this line. Right, we want to leave a little bit of the straight edge here. Because if you go straight in one line down to this point, the flap will keep opening. I don't quite know how to explain that any better. So, and I just do this by my hand. So, I just literally just taking off a little slice like that, and a little slice like that. So there's just a little. I've just created this little bit of angle here. Right, but I've left this bit still straight, a little bit of angle, and that will help me get the thing in. I might end up sometimes, because when you make boxes, this flap can become very long if you're making a thick box. Like when I come to make my cards box for this, it's going to be a real thick tuck box, and you end up with a real thick flap on it, and I would cut the flap down to some kind of a lot shorter. But you'll understand what's happening when and if you make one. Sorry, that's a bit crappy. So we made it. And all we've got to do now is glue it. Glue stick, that's all I use. You could use PVA glue, you can use any glue. I just use a glue stick. Right, and what we want to do, I'll show you on this, and I'll show you on the box. We want to put glue here and here, just in that L shape. So we're putting it down the side, on the corner bit, along there, and on that bit in the middle. So 3 on the bottom and 1 on the side. So we're putting it on all the bits that we cut that tiny little short bit off. And we just put some glue stick on. Make sure you put enough on. More the merrier, really, and make sure you get it all over make sure the whole thing's got. Now, first one I do is I fold it over. I do that lengthways one, so all the ends are still sticking out. I stick that little lengthways in. I use that tab there to get it to the right height. Now it can be hard to push that together, so I would tend to get my ruler, and squash it down like this. Now I use this, I didn't explain, to put the glue on, so I could smear it off the edges, and it just goes onto this bit of rubbish and all over my cutting mat. Then with this, I put the 2 flaps in first, then the long bit, which is, I've cut that little bit off it, and then this bit goes over it. And then, because that's hard to push down, I use my ruler inside to push that down. Now that was why we cut this little bit off. Because if we hadn't cut that little bit off, that wouldn't be anywhere near as neat and tidy. It all gets too bulky in there and just makes a bit of a mess. So, and then I just use my ruler, push it all together. Right, now, while there's still a bit of life in it, now you can see, this is why the glue stick's good. You can see in my mucking around, it's not quite down there properly. So I would, you know, I can move, I'd use that tab to push everything down to the right height, because you need to, that tab needs to go over. So I'm mucking around a bit here just to try and make it all fit together. I'm rushing, kicking the camera like a complete fool. And there's my tuck box. Now sometimes I find that when you make one, this thing flips up, it doesn't stay in properly, and I haven't quite sussed out why it does that fully yet, but you might find that. But I think that might be because there's not enough on the edge. You see, the reason you've cut these slits off is so you can get it in easy, but the reason you've left these bits straight is because it grips and stays shut. If you cut that angle all the way to there, the thing would just pop out. Know what I mean? So that was easy. And then I wouldn't normally put the cards in there yet because the glue's all wet, so I'd leave it for half an hour before I put the cards in. But there we go. That's my tuck box. Look after the cards. And then, as I say, I'd photocopy that. I'd stick that on there, so I'd know. I'd probably notch it, and so I'd know what cards go in there when I come to put the thing away. How long does that take me? 20 minutes to explain? 5 minutes, 6 minutes to make one of them. It's easy. Collect your muesli packets. I mean, you know, I like recycling them. Some people might not like what that looks like, but I think that looks nice with on there. You could print out a sheet with all kinds of fancy graphics and cover that in all fancy graphics and make it look really nice. You know, you can get in the file sections on BGG on the games, quite often you get little templates that in the file section, and you print them out and you just cut around it and it makes the box and it all looks really nice. That's a nice way to do it, but that's good enough for me. I'll stick that on it. Perfect. If it, you know, I might sometimes strengthen these up by putting some kind of masking tape over all the joints. I've done that in the past, but you know, I don't know, they're all right. They do get dirty. They, you know, they do wear out over time as you use them. But what is it? 5 minutes to make another one. So that is it. Tuck boxes. Tuck boxes. Tuck boxes. Tuck boxes. Tuck. 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 That's it. Make them. Goodbye. Excuse me.